great to see all of you. I should say right at the start that Scott is exactly right, except what he doesn't realize now is that when I ask someone a question and they break into song, that is a very good day for me on Good Morning America. We have a great panel here today. We've got Ron Fournier, Editor-in-Chief of National Journal, John Heilemann. I didn't know what your title was, but now I see it there. National Affairs Editor at New York Magazine. Of course, also the co-author of Mark Halperin with Game Change, that book on the 2008 campaign. You're working on a sequel with Mark for 2012, but in the meantime, Game Change is going to become a movie on HBO. Julianne Moore playing Sarah Palin is last time I checked.
You're going to be most shocked by the casting of who's playing you, George.
Remnick. And of course, David Remnick, editor of The New Yorker and author of The Bridge, The Life and Rise of Barack Obama. And we're here on a terrific day because there is some news today. You probably already saw your Blackberries. Chris Christie has decided not to run for president, despite getting entreaties from everyone from Barbara Bush to Henry Kissinger. That's 2 votes in the Republican primaries, maybe. But he told the people of New Jersey, Ron, that they're stuck with him now. I guess my question is the Republican field now set?
Yeah, Republicans are now stuck with the field they have.
Right.
With Mitt Romney as a front runner and the most likely nominee, Rick Perry from Texas has got to get his act together, and then you have some also-rans. But after a lot of looking around in courtship, they got to love the one they're with.
This is it. I mean, Sarah Palin's still playing around out there, John. There was actually a report that just came in a few minutes ago on my BlackBerry, Daily Telegraph, source of all hard news on American politics, saying she's definitely in, but it's not likely, though, right?
I think it's pretty unlikely, but and actually, even if it were to happen, I think would be insignificant at this point. She has, in the same way that I think maybe Chris Christie is missing his moment by not running right now. She missed her moment a long time ago. If she was going to do this, she should have been doing it 6 months ago when people were still enthused. Most of the Republican Party has lost interest in her now.
You say he missed his moment, and I guess that could be true. I mean, everybody, David, is looking at this race right now. You've got President Obama, our latest poll, had him at 42%, lowest approval rating of his presidency. That's obviously a danger zone for any incumbent. He didn't shy away at all yesterday when I talked to him from grabbing onto the underdog mantle. But this is, you've really seen this in the last 6 to 8 months, gone from a race where most Republicans thought we might have a shot to one they think they shouldn't lose.
Well, there's no way to get around this. The economy stinks. And I think there was an associate of yours who coined the phrase that we all know, it's the economy's stupid. And anytime the economy is in such miserable shape with no realistic sense that it will turn around in a very, very positive way soon, much less in years to come, I don't see how it could be otherwise that a president is in trouble. If I were John and Mark Halperin, I'd be a little upset at Chris Christie not running for literary reasons.
He's a big character in so many ways.
He's a character right out of, Nast and Daumier, and he's pissed off all the time, and he's kind of interesting, and he's exited the stage.
But we've seen this so many times before. Someone who everyone loves, especially those in the media, everyone loves as long as they're standing on the sideline. Remember Bill Bradley?
Yep.
And then the minute they get into the race, they get savaged. And I think Christie also might have seen that coming.
Fred Thompson, yeah.
Fred Thompson, he peaked the day he got in.
Right.
General Wes Clark.
There was about a day and a half at the New Yorker when a couple of people at some editorial meeting were absolutely positive that Fred Thompson could not lose.
Could not lose.
Could not lose. Because he was so great on Law and Order.
But George, on the other hand, you think about someone like Hillary Clinton, who back in exactly 8 years ago this time, at the end of 2003, in a very similar situation. John Kerry, kind of unloved establishment favorite, not going anywhere. Howard Dean, beloved by the left grassroots, but a lot of the establishment worried he couldn't beat George W. Bush. Many people were trying to get Hillary Clinton to get in. She thought about it very late into 2003, as we reported in Game Change, and decided not to run, thinking, well, 2008 will be my time. And then it turned out that was Barack Obama's time.
4 years ago at this time, she was, 50 points up,
right.
I think, in the ABC News poll.
Chris Christie might not get reelected 3 years from now, and he may never get another chance to run again. So I respect his decision, but to think that the door will be open again for him 4 years from now, he could be back in private practice again 3 years from now.
I don't think the door was open for him now. I think he would have got in and got his head stumped really quick.
That may be true.
And also, I mean, he did keep saying, I don't want to spend too much time on Christie, but he did say so many times that he wasn't ready. Is that something, Ron, I'll ask you this first, is that something he could have gotten over the course of a campaign?
I think eventually people would overlook that phrase, but the fact is, he was right. He's not ready. It's too late in the race. He's too moderate for the party. He hasn't run before, and as we're seeing with Mitt Romney, there's no replacement for experience, and we're seeing the downfall with Rick Perry. Chances are the same thing would have happened to Christie as happened to Perry. He'd get in with a big fanfare, we all salivate and write all kinds of stuff, and then his gun record would come out. And then his immigration record would come out. And he'd be in the same spot Perry's in.
And what may be happening is something I really thought this year might be the year where the Republicans broke the mold. But it is looking one more time like there's an awful good chance that they nominate the next in line.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, what would have made and maybe still would make this race interesting and dangerous at the same time for my lights is that the pattern of the radical conservative versus the establishment Republican would break. And the pattern has always been, in the end, the establishment Republican prevails for all kinds of both political reasons and also because of structural reasons. Those structural reasons have collapsed because of the Tea Party, because of the fury in the country, because of all kinds of sociological trends.
And the super PACs. And any candidate can create their own super PACs.
But the problem is Rick Perry is a lousy candidate so far, and Michelle Bachmann is already 3/4 of the way out the door.
And it's actually fascinating. It's one of the things, also in a poll that's coming out today, you see the Tea Party support from July to today, and it was all for Bachmann in July, surged over to Perry in August, September, and now Perry's dropping like a stone, and some of it has gone to Kaine. But Kaine is not going to be the Republican nominee.
But fascinating in that poll that so much of what seems to actually be hurting Perry with that group, not with the establishment, which has doubts about him in terms of electability, but it was his immigration stance, which is killing him with those Tea Party voters. And that poll you're citing, George, really shows that the Tea Party cares an enormous amount about this immigration issue, and they're moving off of Perry and towards Kaine for that specific reason, if you read the numbers carefully.
And what it's also showing this time around, Ron, is, and maybe more than any other election that I can remember this early in the game, that debates really matter. Mm-hmm. The debate in June got Tim Pawlenty out of the race, and that one phrase in the last debate may have cost Rick Perry his best shot at the nomination.
I think the reason why the one thing that may not have changed, and all the things that have changed this cycle, especially on the Republican side, is I think primary voters, as they have been in the past, especially on the Republican side, are going to be very pragmatic. What do they want more than anything else is to beat Barack Obama. And at the end of the day, I think that's what Mitt Romney's got going for him.
For these Tea Party supporters, though? They're not going over to Romney, even though most Republican primary voters in the aggregate think he's the most electable candidate.
Right now, it's not true. At the end of the day, I don't think they stay home. I think they come out for whoever's up against Barack Obama, and they come out
exactly. I can't believe that in the end of ends, that the horrible sin of having given health care to the state of Massachusetts will completely do in Romney versus Obama. That they complain.
Oh no, I don't mean versus Obama, but can Romney withstand?
If they're
can he get the nomination?
If they're convinced that Romney's the best guy to beat Obama,
that'll be.
If they're convinced the devil is the best guy to beat Barack Obama,
you're sure they're not. They wouldn't rather be pure than win.
It is visceral how badly they want to beat this president.
It's going to be very unsatisfying for them, though, I think, if that becomes the case. And that, again, I agree with everyone. I think that the Tea Party people will move to Romney. But, the thing that we saw in the Politico debate out in California was Romney previewing the line of attack that would be the most successful line of attack against the president in a general election. And it's one the Tea Party is never going to be very excited about. But when he said, President Obama is a good man, he didn't create this economic crisis, but he tried his best. He tried a lot of stuff. It didn't work, and it's time to move on to an alternative. That is the line of attack that I think will be most effective, and the line the White House fears most.
In the
general election, because a candidate that screams at Obama, calls him a socialist, runs hot, attacks, makes it easy for Obama to win. But that expression of a pity and sympathy more than anger is the thing that will ultimately, if Obama loses, is the line that will lose.
I think, George, you have two huge historical structural things happening at once. One is that you have a global economic miasma that's terrible, and the notion that it can be, quote unquote, solved by lowering taxes on one side or building some bridges and roads on the other is folly. It's going to take a huge number of working parts have to go the right way for it to get better, not solved, but better. When there's a financial collapse, the way there has been both globally and in the United States, it always takes a long time for it to sort out. That's trend number one. The other trend is the realignment of global forces, and American power and status and prestige in the world is shifting because of the rise of Brazil, China, India, and even, God help us, Russia. And it is on one side, you have this kind of anxious rediscussing of where American power it fits in the world. That's the Democratic side. And the Republican side, which is an instance that it's still 1957.
But both forces ended up working against President Obama. And what's so striking about that, here's a president, a politician, who's been the beneficiary of extraordinary luck, political luck in his life. Just the fact that he had the chance to get on the stage in 2004, that he caught Hillary Clinton at exactly the right moment. She didn't apologize for her vote on the war. He capitalized and ran at the right time. But now he may be in a situation, if you're dealing with a global economic crisis and being the president on whose watch Americans began to maybe get the idea that they're not going to be the unrivaled superpower in the world forever.
But that's an unsayable thing in American political dialogue. Unsayable. American exceptionalism in the most infantile way has to be insisted on, at least on the Republican side, or you are eliminated. I don't disagree with you on the luck question.
Well, and you're right, that's unsayable, but what's eminently knowable to the people he has to win over, especially white working class males, is that their lives aren't going to be better than their parents, their kids' lives aren't going to be better than theirs. The American dream is slipping away. And a lot of these folks were hard for Obama to get, but he got them. In places like Macomb County, Michigan.
He needs fewer of them this time around because of the growth of the Hispanic.
But he needs about 15%, 15 percentage points more than he's got right now. Right. And they are angry. They're dispirited. They see the American dream slipping away, and Barack Obama to them seems totally disconnected. And unlike 4 years ago, he looks more like the other. I think the race issue is going to be
more like the other.
I think the race issue, especially among white middle class males.
The president who killed Osama bin Laden.
Yes, I think the race issue, especially among white working class, especially among males, is a big issue.
So that gets to the question, John, of what the president can do about it. From what I can tell, the White House is counting on, and I think you're right, that Romney is the candidate they would like the least of everybody in the race right now. But they're counting on being able to paint any Republican nominee as anti-science, anti-environment, anti-elderly, out of the mainstream. And therefore, sort of do to Mitt Romney what George W. Bush did to John Kerry in 2004, George Bush did to Michael Dukakis in 1988. Make them unacceptable.
Exactly the template. If you're an incumbent, normally when you're running for re-election, re-election is a referendum on you. And what they have to do is try to change this into a choice election. 2004 is the best template for that. And I think for any liberals or Obama files who still maintain the fiction in their minds that he's not, just another politician, you're going to see a very ugly, very negative campaign run out of the White House. They're going to spend more money on negative ads than anybody has ever spent before, $750 million to destroy.
And more money is going to be spent against them, to be fair.
Against them too, but just to say it's going to be a pure brand of politics. They do not have a great economic record to run on, and so they are going to have to disqualify Mitt Romney. And they know a couple things about Mitt Romney. One is they know the Massachusetts record really well. David Plouffe worked for Deval Patrick in Massachusetts. They know where the bodies are buried in Massachusetts. And they also will want to turn him into a tool of Wall Street. His private equity background at Bain, they will try to make synonymous with Wall Street fat cat.
What's disqualifying about forgive me for doing, what's disqualifying about his role in Massachusetts on a national level?
Well, I think they will try to make the argument that his jobs record was very poor, and that they'll argue both that he is not as good. They'll try to convince centrist voters that he's more big government than he lets on, and also that he was more of a tax raiser. And it will seem inconsistent, but they'll make that argument.
They'll try to do what Ted Kennedy did to him in 1994 and talk about Bain just cutting jobs, hundreds of thousands of jobs.
And I think because of the structural changes you've been talking about, I think that class warfare argument could work.
Yep.
David, since you wrote a book about the president, I want to ask you this. I have my own suspicions, but you talk to a lot of people who are close to this race, they look at the overall numbers and say, listen, if Greece defaults and that tips us into a second recession, Ben Bernanke said today the recovery is faltering, and you wake up in the spring and the president's at 33, 30. Is there any chance he pulls an LBJ, or is that just not in his DNA?
I think there is every chance that he pulls it out because the
Oh, I know. I mean, did he pulls an LBJ?
Oh, pulls an LBJ? Oh,
Yeah.
I'm sorry. No.
None, right? Yeah.
Zero. To this day, I can't believe LBJ did, considering who LBJ is. No, I don't think there's any chance in the world. I really don't see it.
You've written about sports, about athletes, famous people. Is there anybody you've ever written about who's more competitive than Barack Obama?
I think that's a great point. I think Obama is one of the really interesting things about him. You see this far more deeply than I do because you're on this all the time, every day. Is this patina of cool should not be read as anything other than ferocious. And when you talk about his luck, well, a lot of people spoke at that Democratic convention. Only one person gave that speech.
Well, absolutely.
Things broke the right way for Barack Obama and his political critics.
In his Senate
no question.
Races, yeah.
But he did beat Hillary Clinton, who was in many ways, by the way, lucky herself in some ways. But he did beat Hillary Clinton in a ferociously difficult Democratic nominating race with Jeremiah Wright hanging around his neck, with the specter of race cutting both ways and all
with his name.
Cross currents. He has a pretty difficult name to overcome.
You can tell a lot about
and
a
what's
guy's
amazing today, somehow he has killed more Al-Qaeda than anyone imaginable. And it doesn't redound to his credit somehow.
Well, it actually may be, but just the economy's so bad.
It is so bad.
I mean, 80% of the people in the country right now think the country's on the wrong track. And anybody here who's either covered politics or worked in politics at some point, it's very hard to win re-election if 80% of the people in the country think the country's on the wrong track. And you're not going to get credit for you're not going to get credit for Osama bin Laden in that circumstance either. Because
that's right. Yeah, David and I were at a meeting a couple weeks ago. We were going back and forth a little bit about whether this is a communications problem in the White House. Nothing, I think, frustrates the president more, even though he'll cop to it. He'll say, yeah, I've got a communications problem, and that notion, and he'll just say, listen, at 9% unemployment, 9.1% unemployment, there's almost nothing you can say.
He could be Shakespeare married to Martin Luther King in his speeches.
Absolutely.
And there's no way to get around 9+ unemployment.
Yeah, I think
to say nothing of the other many, many stark economic factors abound.
But it's an interesting question. Can I ask you a question, George? Because you're the only one in this group that's ever worked in the White House, as far as I know. Unless some of you guys are doing it secretly that I don't know about. At the beginning of the administration, people like Ken Rogoff, the economist from Harvard, went to the administration and said, look, this is a bad thing that's happened. After a financial crisis, we are not going to recover quickly. You can pass a stimulus, you can do these various things, but do not talk as if the economy is going to get better quickly. Talk down expectations. This is going to be a long, rough road.
That's a good point.
The White House did not do that. It set unrealistic expectations for the improvement in the unemployment rate. It talked about the recovery summer in 2010. From the political standpoint of working in the White House, is it impossible to resist the advice to talk down expectations?
Because you can't sell what you're trying to sell at the time without giving people some hope. Back in 1992, we had to put out the number that Clinton's plan was going to create 8 million jobs. And that we obviously you test everything. That number is something that people focused on. And so you have to give them something. Now, I would add at the time, at the beginning, and this is where bad luck comes in, I think even though Ken Rogoff and others were saying this is deeper than you believe, at the time, they did believe that there was, and it's happened twice, that a corner was being turned. And it happened again at the beginning of this year, and then Greece happened. So I think they were captive to two things: one, hope, and two, some data that turned out to be wrong. But I think that's difficult to resist. Where I have a hard time blaming the White House is, there's a lot of second guessing going on right now. Those who say Paul Krugman is right that a bigger stimulus was needed, I believe, at the time. If anyone who believes you could have gotten a penny more than $800 billion in the spring of 2009, I think is just dead wrong.
How much harder?
It was impossible, right?
And how much harder would it have been if you said, it's probably not going to help very much.
And
by the way, there's no guarantee, and my admiration for Paul Krugman is considerable. that a larger stimulus
Would have been
would have,
enough,
quote unquote, solved the recession. There's absolutely no empirical evidence that are there better choices to make in this than worse choices? Absolutely. Is the Ryan plan, to me, the embodiment of Platonic genius? It is not. I think it's an incredible disaster. It's a recipe for much worse. But the notion that that if you pull the right lever, everything will right itself and we will be back to 5% unemployment is fantasy.
It's total fantasy. Yeah. Any questions out there? We could keep going all day, but we'd be happy to bring you into the conversation.
They've eaten so much lunch, and what with the drinking that goes on
I see a lot of the
here.
high-energy drinks out there, though.
What is it?
Go ahead.
I mean, didn't Obama say that it's going to take 2 terms to really fundamentally shift? So to the point of, he gave lots of promises, but wasn't he pretty clear early on that this is something bigger than a stimulus or a tax reduction right from the get-go?
I don't recall him saying that. I do recall him saying at one point, like a lot of politicians do, I'm going to do the right thing, even if it means I'm only going to be a one-termer.
I think he did both. He often talked about the long-term challenges, but they also, as John is pointing out, said that unemployment would be at around 8% and falling at this point, and that's just not happening.
He did, and I think also that, I mean, again, I won't take the position of being the critic in this case, but there is an argument, again, citing another famous economist, Jeff Sachs, who says that the biggest fault was that Obama did give some of those speeches where he said, this is going to take a long time, it's a big structural transformation, the economy is going forward. But what they actually did substantively was mostly short-term. Short-term stimulus, we're now offering short-term tax breaks, everything is short-term. What there hasn't been on the substance is a 10 or 15-year plan to change the nature of America's physical infrastructure, its human capital, its labor markets, its whole tax system. The administration has not taken that on substantively, and I think if you wanted to criticize them for not, even when there was some good words on the long-term challenge, the substance hasn't really followed it. And maybe that's just because they were firemen trying to put out the blaze that was about to burn down the house. But the truth is, as David points out rightly, these are long-term, big, structural, global, technological challenges the economy faces that are not going to be remediated in anything like a 4-year term or let alone a 2-year business cycle.
And John, we have to remember what the opposition is. The nature of the really radical right-wing opposition on almost everything, but particularly on economic policy, is so stubbornly unreasonable and monochromatic that to expect that there would be this kind of structural reordering, much less a successful fireman operation, is I think, well nigh hopeless.
What do you think President's first acts will be when he has a Republican?
Oh, we know what the first one will be. We know for a fact what day one is.
Everybody will get a full head of hair. Exquisite hair.
And some sacred Mormon undergarments.
Ooh. If the Supreme Court hasn't struck down health care by Election Day, his first act on day one would be some kind of an executive order that would symbolically repeal President Obama's health care, I think.
Yep.
That's what he said.
Yeah.
And how effective
would start
is that
running for
going to be? To what degree could that succeed?
Could he undo it?
Yeah.
If he becomes president?
Yeah.
Completely.
Oh, yeah.
Because most of it wouldn't have been implemented by then. Even if this, a little tougher, I think, if the Supreme Court upholds it, which, right now the White House is relatively confident that they will before the election.
Do you think that there's any possibility that the Tea Party will split to run on its own third-party line the way the Green Party has in the past, if their candidate's not selected for the major Republican nomination?
It's a great question. I guess from listening to you guys, none of you think so. You think that enough of them will come around to Romney in the end if they think he can win?
For my part, I think the Tea Party, if you look at the example of 2010, the Tea Party clearly was a movement that was aligned with the Republican Party, but not completely of the Republican Party. But when it came time to vote, it didn't run the third-party candidates in the congressional elections of 2010. It voted for Republicans and helped them take over control of the House of Representatives. I think they are, again, animated, as Ron said earlier, first and foremost, above all and everything, by getting rid of Barack Obama, and they will do what they need to do, including holding their nose over Mitt Romney to get him in.
Well, so money's the big question, right? I mean, Clinton won not only because of Ross Perot, but there was an enormous factor that a man willing to spend a lot of his own money was able to come in. How this would work on a national level for the Tea Party is unknown to me. Jane Mayer has a fantastic piece in the New Yorker this week about, but it's one state, a Tea Party guy who's basically trying to shift a state that went into Obama's pocket unexpectedly and remarkably in the last election, and state legislature race by race, with the expanding of not a lot of money per district, is able to shift the state over. Enormously effective. The guy's name is Pope. But how this would play itself on a national level, it's really hard to run third-party races in the United States. Really
I will say
hard.
longer term, but in our lifetimes, I think we're heading for a dramatic realignment of the parties and maybe the elimination of one of the parties and another party rising up. Why do I say that? If you look at our history in other times of great transformation like this, when we have enormous changes in the economy, enormous changes in technology, enormous changes in the way we connect with one another, there is a history, first of all, of a lot of first-term presidents, and there is a history of enormous change in the political parties when they become as inept as they are now. One thing our system does is eventually right itself.
But would it lead to a new party or a different person? I mean, I don't disagree with your
I'm not sure which.
analysis,
Is it going to be the Whigs or is it going to be Teddy Roosevelt?
Yeah.
Or
Teddy Roosevelt with $1 billion.
Right.
Because, I mean, right now, we haven't...
That's New York City.
Well, and Bloomberg's looked hard at it twice. Now, what he's figured out right now is that you can maybe even get a plurality in a three-way race, but you can't win the Electoral College.
This is the enigma of Bloomberg. I think he's been a really effective, interesting, and in many ways good mayor, and I can't stand the system that allows this to happen. The richest man in the city becomes the leader of the city. There is something really atavistic about this. There's something really wrong with this. And to think that this could play out now on a national level, I think is really regrettable, systemically.
But when you've got more Americans than ever distrusting both parties, the approval rating of Congress is now down to 14%.
Yep.
It's
And
hard
who
to
are
get
those
no
14%?
floor.
Yeah, right. Who'd have
No
known?
floor.
Yeah, it could go farther down.
I think this conversation will get in. Look, there is a group, Americans Elect, which is out
That's the
actually...
Tom Friedman, the one Tom Friedman's tagging.
Is trying to get onto ballot, is actually mounting a campaign to get ballot access across the country right now. They are, I think, more likely than a Tea Party splinter group. They are the more likely, if Rick Perry becomes the Republican nominee, there will be a movement towards some kind of a centrist, liberal Republican, conservative Democrat third party. Whether it will take shape and congeal, I have no idea.
Maybe Tom will run.
Maybe. but I think that seems to me there's more traction there. That not John Huntsman, but a John Huntsman-esque
But there's no intensity
candidate.
behind those positions. That's kind of a fantasy, too.
Well, as I say, I think it's more...
I don't know about that.
Yeah,
the people are really angry, and Washington is
But
not responding.
that means they will go for someone who's even angrier. They're not
That's
going
right.
to go
John
for someone
Huntsman's
who's
not
working
really
down the
angry.
middle.
No, that's true.
Anybody?
Not necessarily.
Okay.
So if it's Romney, how different do you think he'll approach his VP vetting than McCain? And do you
first he'll have
suppose
one.
it'll be a Southern woman?
Well, I can say that my guess is that since John McCain spent literally the mathematical minimum amount of time on his VP vetting, Mitt Romney will do a more thorough and systematic job. than John McCain.
One of the great chapters in John and Mark's books is about the selection of Palin. And what's terrific about it is kind of one of those movies that has granular second by second. It takes longer to read about the moment. Because in the end, it was about 12 and a half seconds.
That's about right. That's about right.
So he's probably thinking about it already.
But yeah, and if you could bet, I mean, if it were Romney, he probably picks Hispanic or Latino from the South or the Southwest.
Rubio.
Marco Rubio from Florida, Susana Martinez from New Mexico. That's the biggest trouble spot for the Republicans in a general election.
But I can't imagine that Marco Rubio is not at the top of that list, of anybody's list, but certainly at the top of Mitt Romney's list. The ability to win Florida and take away some of that Hispanic vote that the president absolutely needs in order to get reelected.
Well, the Republican Party needs it to survive.
Yes, indeed, totally.
Question over here. It sounds like everybody has their small crystal balls out and have elected President Romney. But I'd like to ask if you could take the bigger crystal balls out and think about the next election. Assume Romney wins and he does not pick.
By the way, I don't think we've actually said that, but Go.
Okay. The next election, if you assume he does not pick a Hispanic vice president, the economic problem that president will face will be at least equally as tough as the current one. Does the Republican Party, given its stance on doing things against immigration, does the Republican Party stand a chance of permanently losing the Hispanic vote and thus changing the dynamic going forward as a party?
Well, look, in the next 2 or 3 years, over half of people under 21 will be non-white. The Republican Party better get its act together, or it's going to be irrelevant in our lifetime.
It's one of these things that in front of anything that remotely resembles a liberal audience, I like to point out that the two great far-seeing visionaries on this point were George W. Bush and Karl Rove, who recognized that the Republican Party, if it did not, as Ron says, capture a substantial chunk of the emerging Hispanic vote, was a party that could never be a durable governing majority party going forward in the future. And I think it's one of the, that's why this immigration thing is so important within the party, because it is a fault line that if they come down on the wrong side of it, could hobble them, not necessarily consign them to the dustbin of history, but could be a significant electoral handicap for the Republican Party going forward for the next century.
One more question? I think you had one.
A little louder, if you would. Thanks.
I wanted to know what you all thought about primaries in January and what impact that might have on the race.
It's going to screw up my Christmas.
Again.
My reaction is that it's going to screw up Ron's Christmas.
I like New Year's Eve in Des Moines. It's okay. It's not so bad.
It's why I became an editor.
Yeah.
So you stay home during that.
It's a done deal at this point.
It's over.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, I think you're looking at January 2nd, 9th at the latest for the first caucuses.
Is there any impact on the race, I mean, in terms of fundraising or?
You might have seen a tiny bit of it. It might have been one factor in Chris Christie deciding not to run.
If there was someone who was going to get in very late, it would be it would be 1 month less to raise money and 1 month less to organize. If Christie were getting in right now, he would be wishing that things were starting a month later because of the fact. I mean, I think anything that makes the thing happen faster helps Mitt Romney. But then Mitt Romney has a lot that's going for him anyway, for all the reasons we've been talking about in terms of his establishment, the fact that he's done this before, the fact that he's got the national network all put together. But look, it shuts everything. Everybody's basically playing on the same playing field. So I don't think there's ever a time, Ron, maybe you can point to one, or George, you can, where the changing the calendar has had a material impact on who got nominated, at least in our modern system.
It can be, with everything jammed up, it can make it harder to stop somebody who wins one or two. Maybe the bigger change, though, is that some of these later primaries, the Republican Party, for the first time, at least that I know of, is instead of winner take all, it's going to be proportional as it is in the Democratic primary. And that can really drag it out. That's why Obama, and that's why Hillary was able to go so long with Obama. If they played under the Republican rules, Obama would have won in
second
March.
week.
Second week. So we could. It's more likely that we could have two candidates in the Republican Party go long, not because of moving up the calendar, but because of proportional representation.
That's all that we have time for. Thanks a lot.
Please welcome to the stage